Really True Sports Network. The NFL show is brought to you by PathofPurity.direct. Make sure you check them out. Right now, you got a special through the grueling truth, 2 months for the price of $175 for the highest grade CBD you can find. You just put it under your tongue. It time releases over the next 12 hours into your bloodstream. I highly recommend it. And my name is Mike Goodpastor. I'm your host for the NFL show. And right now, I want to welcome in my co-host, Sam Teets. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, Mike. How about you?
All right, the AFC North is probably the most important division since me and Sam's teams are in the AFC North. And when we look at the AFC North, last year we had Pittsburgh won the division, Baltimore made the playoffs, Cleveland made the playoffs, only Cincinnati didn't. I think this is a division, according to what the Steelers do, I mean, all four teams could be playoff contenders.
But it really does come down to the Pittsburgh and Cincinnati situation, right? Like Cincinnati has to get better, Pittsburgh has to avoid getting worse. Those are the two teams that could really shake things up. I think Cleveland could always come out and have a 4-12, or I guess now it's going to be a 4-13 season. But as long as them and Baltimore hold steady, I think both those teams are probably going to be playoff caliber next year.
I don't know. Cleveland worries me, though, just because they're Cleveland.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Cleveland, if there's a team that's going to drop off, Cleveland's the prime candidate to do it.
All right, let's go ahead. Let's start off with the Baltimore Ravens, who last year I think advanced farther in the playoffs than the Steelers, didn't they?
Yeah, so did Cleveland, actually. But at least we made the playoffs.
Yeah, everybody did. Yeah, but at least we made the playoffs is something you never want to say.
That's true.
Because that means you failed. And
yeah, it's basically you didn't go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, the Ravens entered the 2021 NFL free agency coming off an 11-5 season in 2020. They have 18 free agents, including 15 who are unrestricted. Now, they overhauled the front seven of the defense last year. Let's go ahead and let's check out quarterback, where everybody's under contract. And I don't think they're necessarily even have a need to sign an experienced backup, because I think Trace McSorley and Tyler Huntley actually are not bad second and third choices behind Lamar Jackson.
No, McSorley actually made one of the throws that scored a touchdown against Pittsburgh when Lamar Jackson was out that 1 week. And realistically, the drop-off from RG3 to Trace McSorley, it's not a huge deal at this point. RG3 did not play that well this past year when he did have playing time. And McSorley is a much cheaper option. As for Lamar Jackson, the only time he's missed really has been with COVID-19. That's something you won't have happen again. So for him, I'm not so worried about injuries, even though he's a running quarterback.
All right, when you look at running back, which seems to be the most important thing because they want to run the ball, Mark Ingram, cut, J.K. Dobbins, Justice Hill, you got Williams. I mean, when you look at these guys, the guy that stands out to me here is Gus Edwards. And Gus Edwards is a guy they've probably got to re-sign because Dobbins and Edwards together are one of the best 1-2 punches in football.
Yeah, I believe Gus Edwards is a restricted free agent. You absolutely have to get him back. You don't cut Mark Ingram unless you know that you're going to bring back Gus Edwards, because what he's done, he's been really consistent the past 3 years. It's over 700 yards each season. He's really a power back. He's averaged 5.2 yards per carry the past 3 years. This is a guy you know is going to be productive. You know he's going to be right around 700 yards each year. And while we expect that you're going to get more production out of J.K. Dobbins this coming season, you really don't know. Some players don't make that jump to next season. And I expect J.K. Dobbins will be a 1,000-yard rusher, but if he isn't, Gus Edwards is the guy you need to fall back on.
Yeah, you look at wide receiver, I think this is one of the biggest needs with this team. They were last in the NFL in catches, last in receiving yards. I don't think that they're the kind of team that's going to go out and throw a lot of money at Allen Robinson or Kenny Golladay. I would say you probably sign 1 or 2 wide receivers from a second-tier group like Corey Davis, Sammy Watkins, maybe even A.J. Green. That would boost the Ravens' passing game, they believe, at a lesser cost. But at some point, if you want Lamar Jackson to be a legit, elite franchise quarterback, you got to get him somebody to go catch the ball. You need a number one guy. I mean, Marquise Brown is good. Boykin is good. Everybody they got's good, but nobody stands out.
Yeah, that's the issue right now. I mean, you drafted a guy in Marquise Brown in the first round who just is not that kind of player. He's going to get you maybe 800 yards a game, 800 yards a year, probably at most, but he's not going to be a guy who can go to and take over a game. You just don't have that player on your roster. And you're right, I don't foresee them going after and chasing a big name free agent. So what do you do after that? I mean, do you try it in the draft? There's a couple of good players in the draft, but I don't know that I feel more confident about the 4th or 5th best receiver on the board, or Rashad Bateman or Terrace Marshall, than I do about Marquise Brown. So I really think you have to go for those mid-level free agents and see what you can get with those guys.
Yeah, and tight end, I think, is a position nobody even thinks about, but they lost Hayden Hurst. When you look at it, Andrews is in his final year of his contract. they need and they have to look at bringing in a pass catching tight end either in free agency or the draft.
Yeah, I think you need to check out that option because you don't really know what's going to happen at that tight end spot. I think Mark Jackson will thump the table for bringing Mark Andrews back, considering the connection he's had with him. And you do have Nick Boyle on the roster, who's a good run blocking tight end, but he missed about half this past season. I think they will go with tight end, but probably late in the draft. I don't anticipate them going on very early in it. And there's some bargain guys out there. You could go out and get a Trey Burton or someone like of that caliber player fairly easily, or maybe even a Jordan Reed, someone like that. You don't have to necessarily get a well-rounded blocking tight end if you're going to primarily use him as a pass catcher.
All right, when we look at the offensive line, I think this is the necessity. They have to upgrade the offensive line. A guy like Joe Thuney, Corey Linsley, maybe even a Kevin Zeitler who got cut. But they've got to upgrade the offensive line too. I mean, this Ravens team, I think, has a lot of issues on offense.
No, I agree with you. The Ravens offensively, they built a offensive line built for run blocking, but they had the injury to Ronnie Stanley this past year. He's come back. He'll be a good left tackle. The concern now is Orlando Brown, who was your Pro Bowl right tackle, is now demanding a trade because he wants to play left tackle for someone else. So now if you end up trading him away, you might get a first-round pick in return, which could help you out, maybe replace him. But you're trading a known commodity for an unknown factor at that point. So you're going to probably need a new right tackle. You need a new center because the center you have, Matt Skura, as a free agent. So you're needing someone there. You probably need a new guard somewhere along the line because you have Ben Powers, Bradley Bozeman, and guys like DJ Fluker in there. So you have to have some kind of replacement situation set up for those players as well. I think you could see 3 new starters along the offensive line for Baltimore this year, and you have to do that probably in the mid-levels of the draft and also through free agency.
Well, and the thing is, Matt, if you lose Skura, it's not a huge loss because he couldn't even snap the damn ball.
No, he couldn't. So you maybe get Austin Reeder from Kansas City, who was their starting center this past year. That's not a fantastic upgrade, but it's a relatively cheap upgrade, and he'll at least be able to get your quarterback the football.
Yeah, and how about this? If you do that, you just weaken Kansas City, which is one of your main opponents to get to the Super Bowl.
Exactly. You can get two birds with one stone there.
All right, defensive line-wise, Derek Wolf's the only guy that, he's an unrestricted free agent. It looks like they're going to try to bring him back. My question is, they're going to have to draft a guy or two in this draft because you got Campbell and Williams both in the final years on their deals.
Well, yeah, and they're both older players as well. It's not just the fact they're in the final years of their deals. They're getting up there in age. I look at someone like Ali McNeil from NC State, kind of play that nose tackle role. He's a big body player who can also rush the passer a little bit. So it gives you a little bit of a multi-versatile layer there you don't have with some of the guys right now. And I'll be honest, Calais Campbell just is coming off one of his worst seasons in the past 10 years, arguably his worst season since his rookie year or since an injury-shortened season. So you might keep him around, but it's going to cost you contract-wise. You're not going to bring him back after next year. So you really have to start thinking long-term where you're going to get your next 3-4 defensive ends from.
Yeah, and in linebacker, I think the overall biggest void at any position is outside linebacker for them. Judon's not going to get re-signed. Ngakoue is not expected to return. I think the more likely scenario is re-signing Bowser and McPhee and drafting a pass rusher either in the first or second round. But with this, and we've talked about it, edge pass rushers, not deep in this draft. So maybe go after a moderately priced guy like Justin Houston or Jadeveon Clowney. But either way, I think there is a lot of issues here linebacker-wise.
Yeah, I was thinking about Jadeveon Clowney because he should be relatively cheap considering that he didn't get the contract he wanted last year and then he missed most of the season with injuries. So you're obviously taking a little bit of a gamble there. But someone like him on a $6 or $7 million deal is actually a pretty good value. I think you will resign Bowser. I think you'll probably try to bring back McPhee, even though he's getting older. Maybe 1 2 year deals for both of them. But you can't afford to get Judon and Ngakoue back. I don't think you honestly want either of those guys back if you can afford it at this point. So Jadeveon Clowney, and looking through the other guys available on the edge, I don't think you go after Bud Dupree or Hassan Reddick because those guys are going to ask for probably $10 million a year, if not more. Maybe you try for a Melvin Ingram and play him at defensive end or outside linebacker. Maybe an Alden Smith. I don't know how you feel comfortable with those guys.
Yeah, secondary-wise, I think is where this team's the most solid. Maybe they'll add 1 or 2 more guys just as special teams players. But I think secondary-wise, they're pretty set. But when I look at this team overall, I think there's a lot of issues with the Ravens looking into next year right now.
Well, yeah, it mainly comes from, I think, the offensive line and the defensive front. It's those 2 factors that really make the difference. And that wide receiving core, like I said, it's also a problem, but they've won in spite of that in the past couple of years. If you start having situations that offensive line is falling apart And that defensive line, which has really helped the secondary out the past couple of years, that starts falling apart as well. That just, I mean, we saw it this past year in the Super Bowl. You have to be able to win with the defensive line and the offensive line. If Baltimore starts falling apart on both those fronts, they're probably going to slow down quite a bit and be maybe more of an 8 to 10 win team versus a 11 to 13 win team.
All right, next up, we're going to talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. 4-11-1 last year. They have at least 24 unrestricted free agents, pretty far under the salary cap. Joe Burrow will be back, which means they'll probably win a Super Bowl. But when you look at the quarterbacks, I mean, you've got Burrow. I think there's intrigue here at the backup position because Brendan Allen had his moments. Ryan Finley had to win against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Overall, I think this is a team that needs a backup quarterback. I wouldn't mind seeing them going out if they can not spend too much money and maybe getting Andy Dalton.
You know, I think Bengals fans actually love that. Bengals fans would love to have him come back. The only thing is, someone's probably going to offer a lot more money for Andy Dalton this offseason. And you have to believe someone's going to offer him a starting job at some point, or at least the role where he can become a starter.
Yeah. At running back, Joe Mixon, always hurt, but he's back. Giovanni Bernard, Travion Williams, Jacques Patrick. I think they're pretty set here. Running back Bernard, I think, showed that he still has value if Mixon's healthy. Travion Williams played well when he was forced into action. Samaje Perine, or Perine, whatever the hell his name is, actually played pretty well too, but he's an unrestricted free agent. But I think the Bengals are pretty much locked in long-term for the next few years, at least at running back.
Well, and you paid Joe Mixon a pretty big contract extension this past year as well, so I don't think you're going to move away from him at this point. You're kind of married to him for the next couple of years.
All right, wide receiver, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Auden Tate. Decent group. They need one or two more guys. Unrestricted free agents, A.J. Green, I think he's gone. John Ross is gone. Alex Erickson, who cares? He fair catches too many punts inside the 10. Mike Thomas, who was all right from time to time last year. But I think this is a position where the Bengals need to get an emphasis. They need an outside receiver to pair with Boyd and Higgins.
Yeah, they do. And my question is, do they go that early in the draft? Because obviously they would have a shot. They're going to have a shot at guys like Jamar Chase if they want him. They could trade back and probably still get a guy in the top 10, top 12 picks or so. So they're going to have opportunities to do that early on in the draft. But if you feel that you want Penei Sewell instead or someone like that, you don't have to go there. In free agency, you do have guys like veteran players who will be relatively cheap. It won't be 1,000-yard receivers by any chance, but you can get a Marvin Jones or a T.Y. Hilton maybe for a lot less than what you would pay for a top-end free agent kind of player.
Yeah, and then when you look at tight end, this is the thing that's interesting with the Bengals. They pick at 5. So you've got the tight end from Florida there. You've got all these offensive tackles. You've got the 2 wide receivers. Tight ends of position. CJ Uzama, I think, will be gone because they can save $5 million off the cap. Drew Sample showed a little bit of value last year, but I don't think he's really the guy. This is a team that doesn't really seem to value tight ends right now, and they really should if they watch the Super Bowl. For both teams, actually watched the Super Bowl the last few years. Everybody seems like they've got a tight end playmaker. And I think with Uzama out, I think tight end is a place they've got to go. And really, the kid from Florida may make more sense here, especially if you let Uzama go, because you're only really going to have one guy, Drew Sample, on the roster.
Well, and Kyle Pitts is probably the best tight end prospect, not necessarily maybe the most well-rounded. It's probably T.J. Hockenson, probably the best tight end prospect from the past 10 years. There's only 2 tight ends who have gone in the top 10 selections in the past decades, Eric Ebron and T.J. Hockenson. So I think Kyle Pitts will probably become the third member of that group. But if you're going to look at free agency, I would suggest Gerald Everett from the Rams. He had 400 yards in 2019, 400 yards this past year in 2020. It's not going to be a huge splash signing, but this guy will still get you probably 40 to 50 yards per game in a featured role.
All right, offensive line, one of the biggest needs, maybe the biggest need of this team. I think they need an offensive tackle. I think they need 2 guards. They've got to plug at least one of those 3, and preferably 2 of those 3 in free agency, Sam.
Yeah, and the question is, how much do you spend on these guys? Because you're going to have someone like Trent Williams is going to be available. Do you go all in on trying to pay for – well, Trent Williams is the left tackle. You don't need that. Although you could slide Jonah Williams over to right tackle. You probably wouldn't be opposed to that move if it means getting him. But Darrell Williams from Buffalo, he's out there. That's a right tackle for you if you feel comfortable with that. And then guards, the guard market in free agency is a lot lighter than the tackle market. You're going to have a lot of guys come available for the offensive tackle position, even in the draft. But I don't know that you'll be able to get a high-end value guard in free agency.
See, that's why I would almost try to go all in on a Thuney or a Shreve.
See, yeah, that would make sense. If you can pay that much money to go for an all-pro caliber guard, I would absolutely do that if you're Cincinnati at this point. You have to invest up front to protect Joe Burrow because he is your future. He's going to win you the next 15 Super Bowls, right, Mike? So you have to protect him.
Don't get stupid. Probably 12 out of 15 now. There'll
Oh,
probably
I'm
be
sorry.
a couple years where it'll be let down or maybe he'll be hurt again. But when I look at the offensive line situation with the Bengals, I think it is much better than what it was because you do have a new offensive line coach, Frank Pollock, who is much better than the Turner guy who was there, who never should have been hired. I think that helps also. We go to defensive end. Carl Lawson is an unrestricted free agent. When I look at this, you either got to bring him back with a franchise tag or a long-term contract, or you let him go. Even if you bring him back, you're probably still going to have to go get another pass rusher because you've got basically Sam Hubbard and Carl Lawson right now. Two guys doesn't get it. I think Lawson is a guy, if he doesn't cost too much, you almost got to try to bring back, but his play has been sporadic. This year he played pretty well. The year before, a little off. His rookie season, he was a stud. So I think Carl Lawson, whether they can re-sign him or not, tells a lot about which direction this defense goes.
Yeah, I had him at number 38 on my top 100 free agents entering this offseason. Here's the other thing, though. You're probably going to cut Geno Atkins here. Because Geno Atkins barely played this past year, and you know that. And you can't count on him to be super productive at his age anymore. And you can say, I think it was around $8 million by cutting Geno Atkins.
So well, how about this? He's not going to be super. I think he could be super productive, but unless they change the defensive scheme, he's not, because the way they want to play defense is not beneficial to Geno Atkins. I mean, that's simple. The defense is stupid. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, if they're going to keep playing defense this way, you're probably going to end up cutting Geno Atkins. So you're going to need some more reinforcements on the interior as well as that defensive end position. And get defensive end, not a great market this offseason. You talked about Carl Lawson. He might be the best defensive end available at this point. And if he is, you're probably going to have to franchise tag him unless you want to go in on a guy like Olivier Vernon who's coming off an injury from Cleveland. I don't think you necessarily want that. And you probably don't want to pay a guy like Yannick Ngakoue. So franchising Carl Lawson might be the move.
That's what I would do. We'll go to linebacker, where Josh Bynes and Jordan Evans are both unrestricted free agents. Bynes played. He did what he did. He's an average linebacker. I think he's a guy, I don't know if you have to re-sign him, but you don't have anybody that can replace him on this roster. Jermaine Pratt was a guy who showed a little bit more than what he had the year before. I think they play him out of position. Logan Wilson, I think, had a good season. Akeem Davis-Gaither, I think, looks good. This is his team that still needs another linebacker or two also.
Yeah, and if you're going to look for a linebacker for your 4-3 scheme, if you're trying to replace someone like Josh Bynes, I don't know would KJ Wright fit that role? Because KJ Wright would be a guy who would be relatively cheap for maybe a year-long contract. You can get him in. He's a veteran player, not going to be a superstar, obviously, but he'll plug that hole until you figure out what you're trying to do with your future there.
All right, we go to cornerback. You got William Jackson, who is an unrestricted free agent. He played well last year, not great. Waynes was one of the big acquisitions in 2020, but of course he missed the entire season with a pec injury. I think they definitely need a slot corner, but you need a lot more than that if you don't re-sign William Jackson.
And talking about slot corner, Desmond King from Tennessee, he is going to be a free agent, so you might take a run at him. He was a first-team All-Pro a couple of years ago. All those plays dropped off a little bit since then. There's also Mike Hilton from Pittsburgh, who was probably a top 5 slot corner in the NFL this past year, and Cam Sutton, his backup, who played really well on limited snaps. So those are probably your best options at slot corner right now. If you're going to go for a premier outside corner, Shaquille Griffin from Seattle has been up and down lately, but he's going to be available. I would think you'd probably make a run at him, and he might be your best option if you're trying to sign a big-name cornerback.
All right, at safety, Von Bell, Jesse Bates, I think, were one of the best combinations of safeties in the NFL last year. You have an unrestricted free agent, Sean Williams, Brandon Wilson. Brandon Wilson is one of the best kick returners in football. So I would think he's not going to cost that much. He's your third safety. I think he's a priority to get him to get signed. I think when you look at this team, safety is probably the strong point outside of Joe Burrow.
No, Jesse Bates was the best safety in the NFL this past year. I don't think you need to add anyone at this position unless you feel comfortable with a guy maybe in the 5th or 6th round you think is a high-end talent who's just falling down the board. That's probably the only spot you're going to add a safety this offseason.
All right. Now we get to talk about our favorite thing, the Cleveland Browns. I know you
Yeah, this
love
is
some
being
Cleveland
fun.
Browns football. All right. The Browns made the playoffs. They lost to the Chiefs. The end. No. They entered 2021 coming off probably their best season since what, 1994. Um, the offense is almost entirely under contract, but I think it's safe to say the defense is where they have issues. At quarterback, Baker Mayfield, Case Keenum, Kyle Lalaletta. I think they're in good shape there. At running back, I mean, everybody's under contract. You got Chubb and Hunt. At wide receiver, I mean, pretty much everybody you need is under contract. This offense is pretty set. You've got Odell Beckham Jr. Do you think he gets traded?
I don't know, but if he's not on your roster, you could save close to $14 million if you were to cut him, or if you trade him, you probably have to split a little bit of that. But you could still save significant money there and maybe recoup a first-round pick. I don't know. I mean, the offense ran pretty well without Odell this past year. I don't think you need him on the roster. And if you were to move on from him, there's plenty of free agent wide receivers who will be less expensive, but could eventually replace him and replace his abilities in that offense, especially considering that, like I said, he missed most of this past season. The offense was better without him.
All right, we look at tight end, Austin Hooper, David Njoku. But if you saw the interview with Jim Rome, Njoku hinted he's still not happy in Cleveland. If I was Cleveland, I wouldn't really care. They've already picked up his fifth-year option. So really, until we get to the offensive line, this offense is pretty intact and pretty set. But if you want to win a Super Bowl, don't you have to upgrade something somewhere?
Usually, and most people focus on the defense for that, but I do think looking at that offensive line, I mean, do you really want to upgrade anyone on the offensive line, though? I think all five of these guys are pretty good.
No, I'm saying your upgrade, I think, would have to come at wide receiver. I think you can upgrade by getting rid of Beckham and then going after somebody, because Beckham has been hurt, and there's nothing that tells me that Odell Beckham is a guy that's going to put you over the top to win a Super Bowl.
Well, no, because he hasn't been that guy since his first 3 years in New York. And I know people keep defending Odell Beckham based on his talent, but let me put it this way. Odell Beckham has not put together an all-pro caliber season since 2016, and he has not played like a Pro Bowl or an all-pro since 2018. So it's been an issue for him. He's not performed well while in Cleveland. He's averaging right around 58, 59 yards per game in the past 2 seasons with the Browns when he's been healthy. So I don't think he's worth what they're paying him.
All right, let's go to the defense, because I think the offense is set. When we look at the defensive line, of course, you got one of the best in the game at Myles Garrett. Olivier Vernoneau, who's 30 years old, had a good season last year, but did have a ruptured Achilles. Can you afford to bring him back? I mean, and I don't mean afford by money-wise, but just can you afford the risk that he's not going to be what he was just because of the injury? Because a torn Achilles is nothing to mess with, especially when you're 30 years old.
I'm not bringing Olivier Vernon back because he suffered that injury late in the regular season. So nothing tells me that he's going to be ready for I don't even know if he's going to be able to play week 1 or week 2 this coming year. So I don't want to be paying him big bucks if he's going to be missing time. And he has not played a 16-game season. He's not played a 15-game season since 2016. So this guy has an injury history. He now has suffered a significant injury. He's 30 years old. He's probably going to want to be paid like a starter or like a premier player. If I'm Cleveland, I'm not doing that. So you're going to have to go find someone either in the draft. And this is why they were talking about J.J. Watt to some degree when there were rumors going around about where he might sign. You're going to need to find someone to fill in and replace Olivier Vernon.
All right, we look at linebacker. You've got B.J. Goodson, who's an unrestricted free agent, solid player. But the thing I see when I watch Cleveland is they have to add speed, coverability. I mean, they're bad at linebacker, I think.
Yeah, no, they're bad. They need help. And I don't know where it's going to come from, though. And for like, if you got your hands on Levante David, that obviously is the ideal fit. That's the ideal fit for most teams in the NFL because he's a guy who can be very scheme diverse. He's played in 3-4 and 4-3 defensive fronts in the past, and he's a good in pass coverage. That's the guy you want. The issue is that there's only maybe 4 or 5 players in the NFL that are of Levante David's caliber, and he's the only one of them who's hitting free agency this offseason. So I have trouble seeing them landing any of the guys who's going to make an impact in free agency at that position. Maybe a Matt Milano. I don't know.
Yeah, you look at defensive back. I mean, I think this all depends on Williams and Delpit and how they come back from their injuries and how good they are because we really don't know yet.
No, we don't. I mean, Greedy Williams and Grant Delpit were both projected to be high-caliber players coming out of LSU. And I would still have more hope for Grant Delpit just because we haven't seen him play yet versus Greedy Williams, who did not have he has struggled quite a bit since going to Cleveland. And Denzel Ward's been up and down a little bit too, but he came back, bounced back a bit with this past season. So I do hold out hope for some of the young players in Cleveland secondary, but let's be honest, we're picking on a unit here. It's probably not the defensive line. They'll probably sign enough guys to still be good up front. But I think the linebacking core and the secondary are the two biggest needs for Cleveland this offseason.
All right, let's transition to the Steelers. But I would say this. When I look at this and we actually break down position by position, I think the Cleveland Browns would have to be the favorite to win this division going into next season.
Purely on paper, I could agree with you there, especially because the offense is so solid and the offensive line is tremendous. It's probably one of the best in the league right now. My only main concern is that this has been a tremendous roster on paper the past 2 years, and they had one losing season, they've had one winning season, and it's the Cleveland Browns. So I just can't say for certain that this is going to be the team that's going to win this division right now.
Yeah,
obviously, again, on paper, it looks very good.
It's on paper, but on paper, the head coach is much better than what they had a couple of years ago, too.
That's true. He still might not be a tremendous coach either, by the way, but he'll be much better than what they've had when they were shuffling guys out every 1 or 2 years.
It wouldn't take much. All right, let's go to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who won the division last year. They were undefeated for, what, 2/3, 3/4
games
season. And then the Bengals smacked them. The Browns smacked them twice. The Redskins smacked them. Everybody smacked them. They got smacked in the playoffs by the Browns, where they gave up 118 points. And they ended up losing the game. And now the Steelers expect to have Roethlisberger back. And, I mean, he's a $41 million cap hit. You got to give him to you got to have him give some of that money back, don't you?
No, you absolutely have to. They can do this multiple ways. There's ways to restructure it, and if they extend him, which will basically just be kicking the can down the road a couple of years, you'll take cap hits in the future. But if you extend him, you could save $20-something million in the cap this year, and that way you still afford to keep him on the roster. Again, you could just straight up cut him, and that would fix all your money problems of your Pittsburgh. But it's just very difficult. You have to agree to extend him or restructure his deal in some way. Otherwise, you can't possibly afford to bring him back.
All right, we get a running back for the Steelers, and I think it gets even worse. I mean, James Conner is going to be gone probably. Benny Snell is not a number one guy. Samuels, McFarland, not number one. I mean, they need running backs right now. And the fact that Derek Watt's still on the team still blows my mind. It must just be because he's related to TJ and JJ.
Yeah, this running back core is pretty horrible at this point. You have to go out and find a star somewhere else. I mean, we know James Conner is not coming back. I don't expect him to come back this year, but even if he did, he would still be the best running back on this roster, and tells you quite a bit about what they have currently. Now, could they be in play for a running back in the second round of the draft? I think they would be. I think they would actually be smart to go out and get a guy like Michael Carter or Javonte Williams from UNC. I think that would be the play in the second round, if either of those guys are available. Because in free agency, there's a bunch of lateral moves. Chris Carson's been injured 2 out of his 4 years right now. There's not a lot of upgrades there in free agency.
All right, let's get wide receiver, where Juju Smith-Schuster will probably be gone, correct?
Yeah, I would assume at this point. They're not going to pay him a ton of money to come back.
So Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, good. They've got issues here too. I mean, I think that when you look at Pittsburgh, their offense is the exact opposite of the Cleveland Browns right now.
Yeah, you're going to have turnover. You're going to lose basically 5 or 6 starters along this offense, or you're going to have to change them out at some point. Smith-Schuster was a great slot receiver for Pittsburgh, but you can always push Deontay Johnson to that role. He's played slot in the past as well. Chase Claypool can move around a little bit, but and I think Claypool could be a true number one. But if Ben can't throw the ball downfield to him, then there's obviously just no point. James Washington's a solid deep threat, but not really an underneath guy either. And Deontay Johnson had a bunch of issues with drops this past season. So I think you have to try to find a true number one. You can't afford one in free agency. You probably can't even afford to pick one in the draft because of what else you need on the offense. So I think the receiver core is going to go into next year probably being about the same minus Juju Smith-Schuster.
All right, tight end, kind of the same thing. You lose Vance McDonald, Eric Ebron's back. Yay. They need another piece at tight end.
Yeah, they do. But, I mean, you can't afford Hunter Henry. You're probably not going to pay Jared Cook. I don't know what you're going to do here at tight end. There's just not a lot of guys out there. Do you want to go in Gerald Everett? I mean, there just aren't guys that you're going to be able to afford. And the guys you can afford, are they going to be upgrades over Eric Ebron? Not really. So I just think they were probably going to see Eric Ebron come back again next year unless Pittsburgh cut him to save money.
Yeah, didn't he go to the offensive line? It doesn't get any better. Marquise Pouncey retired. Likely Villanueva is going to be gone in free agency. And this is an offensive line that 4 or 5 years ago may have been the best in football. Nowhere near that now.
No, you're going to look at an issue where you've got Kevin Dotson, who's going to be, I think, a second-year player for Pittsburgh. He'll probably slide into your left guard spot. And you'll probably try to re-sign Zach Banner, who's a free agent. Maybe play him at left tackle or right tackle. I don't know where you want him at this point, but you're going to have to re-sign a couple of guys. Matt Filer, who's your start at left guard this past year as a free agent, I would go all in trying to get him back. He can start right tackle or at guard. So I want him back on the roster. But if I'm Pittsburgh, probably 2 of your first 3 selections in this upcoming draft are going to have to be offensive linemen, and one of them is going to have to be a center.
All right, defensive line. I think they're pretty set at defensive line. They've got Tuitt and Hayward under contract for a while. I mean, the front 7 here is still the strength of this football team.
Yeah, you're going to be missing Tyson Alu, who's going to leave probably in free agency, and he's probably going to get a decent payday, actually. He worked really well for them. I think a lot of people have overlooked him this past year for what he did on the defense. And it is going to be difficult to replace him, but he's getting up there in age, and I think you could find a guy who could be more of a space stuffer in that defensive line. You could probably get someone like that in the 4th or 5th round of this year's draft.
All right, linebacker. I think the linebacker core has the starters in place, but I think they've got major depth issues. You've got Bud Dupree. I mean, is Bud Dupree? I mean, you can't afford him, can you?
No, absolutely not. Even with the injury, someone's going to pay him upwards of $10 million a year, and Pittsburgh's not going to be able to match that.
Yeah, and I think that a priority here is getting T.J. Watt extended.
Oh, absolutely. You have to make sure you can't let T.J. Watt walk out of the building or end up in a situation like with Le'Veon Bell or what Dallas is currently doing with Dak Prescott, where they're franchise tagging him 2 years in a row. You can't possibly end up doing that with T.J. Watt. This guy's a Hall of Fame caliber talent. He could have won the Defensive Player of the Year award this past season. You want to sign this guy up to a long-term extension and make it as long as possible, because if it's only like a 4 or 5 year deal, he's going to cash in again further down the road, and that will make it even more difficult for Pittsburgh in a couple of years.
All right, at cornerback, the Steelers risk losing 2 major pieces in Hilton and Sutton. They might be able to re-sign one of them. I don't think there's any way they can do both. But even re-signing one means that maybe you got to let a Hayden or a Nelson go, who both have $14-15 million cap hits.
Yeah, and you could save anywhere between $7 to $8 million on both those guys if you were to release either one of them at this point. I just don't feel comfortable with that, because Mike Hilton's more of a slot corner. So is Cam Sutton. They're both slot corners right now. And Hilton can move outside. Yes, he's done it in the past, but you don't have anyone else out there to replace a Steven Nelson or a Joe Hayden if you're to move on from them. You're basically going to be moving up Justin Lane, who hasn't proven anything to me at this point in his career that he's capable of starting on the outside or starting even in the slot at this point. So I think that getting rid of Hayden or Nelson, even though neither of them match their phenomenal 2019 performances this past season, getting rid of either one of them would be a nightmare.
All right, safety, pretty set. Minka Fitzpatrick, Terrell Evans. The one thing here is, they need to exercise the option for these guys. I think Fitzpatrick's a no-brainer. I think Edmonds is a little bit tougher evaluation.
Yeah, I was all out on Edmonds last year, but he actually had the best season of his career this past year. 2 interceptions, 8 passes defensed, 68 tackles, and he only allowed a 70.8 passer rating when targeted and covered, which is significantly better than 2019 when he allowed a 131.6. It's very difficult to evaluate him because, like I said, he's 24 years old, coming off his best season. I think they exercise the option because realistically they just can't afford to go out and find anyone new at this point. But financially, if it doesn't fit, I wouldn't put it past him to just let him go. Just not exercise that option, because you have to pay Minka Fitzpatrick. You have to pay T.J. Watt. And if Terrell Evans has to get passed over because of that, oh well.
All right, honest opinion, 1 through 4, if you had to rank them right now headed into next year, who's your 1 through 4?
Baltimore 1, Cleveland 2, Pittsburgh 3, Cincy 4.
Yeah, you're a homer again, because there's no way after just talking about that you can have Pittsburgh anywhere but 4. I'm not a homer because I've got Cleveland at 1, Baltimore at 2, Cincinnati 3, Pittsburgh 4. Cincinnati and Pittsburgh are interchangeable. One of them might do something, but other than that, this looks like a 2-horse race right now, unless the Bengals or Steelers do some major upgrading.
Yeah, it's going to. I mean, you have Zach Taylor head coach. That's my biggest issue with you. If you had someone who's better at head coach, I would put you ahead of Pittsburgh, but it's Zach Taylor.
Yeah, Mike Tomlin's awesome.
Hey.
Oh, I must have pissed him off when I made fun of Mike Tomlin. He'll be back in a second, though. There he is.
Yeah, I got dropped off there for a second.
You got mad because I said something bad about your boy Mike Tomlin.
Hey, Mike Tomlin versus Zach Taylor. Who are you taking?
I'll take John Harbaugh.
Well, that's the right answer, but that wasn't an option in this case.
Hell, I'll take Jim Harbaugh. He's a better pro coach in college anyways. Tomorrow, what division are we doing? AFC East? AFC West? We did the
AFC East yesterday, so let's do the AFC West tomorrow.
The West or South. All right, AFC West tomorrow at 1 o'clock. You can follow Sam Teets at Sam Teets 33. You can follow me at Grilling Truth Inside Boxing Daily. We'll be on today at 2 o'clock, live on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, a bunch of other places. But for now, Sam, I want to make sure everybody remembers you go to pathsecurity.direct to get a special 2 months CBD for the price of one, $75. Make sure you check out pathsecurity.direct. So for now, for Sam Teets, I'm Mike Goodpastor. You've been watching and listening to The Grueling Truth